Hi everyone, I'm here with Augustin Hadelich. Thank you so much for being with us here in Aspen. Augustin is performing the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto. I had a few questions for you more about on the violin side of things. You're a very inspiring musician. When I watch you, I can tell your brain is on, that you're thinking about how you're playing and the ergonomics of playing the violin. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about hand frame. We're all taught to kind of find a good hand frame, especially when we have to reach for tenths or fingered octaves. And what I see from you is a unique hand frame that looks very efficient and kind of ready for all of that without maybe too much maneuvering. And so I'm wondering how you came upon this and if you can kind of describe what you're doing.
Well, it is true. So it's a little bit unusual that my first finger does not touch on the side. So it's not built up this way, but actually there's always a space between the first finger and the fingerboard. It has some advantages. My pinky is pretty short, so it means that I can always reach without having to rotate the hand. And it also means that when having a large shift, because my hand is already over here, it's just traveling kind of on a horizontal line rather than also having a rotation of the arm at the same time. And it's something I tell myself sometimes before a very difficult shift, because still there is maybe a rotational thing going on, that before the shift I actually go there already and then only have the horizontal motion. But as to why I got that hand frame, I'm actually not sure. But I was taught in a kind of unconventional way by my father, who was not a violinist, was an amateur cellist. He just had a lot of opinions of how not to teach the violin. And he had this idea that he taught me starting in a high position and then going down. Because he said, when you start in first position, and then it's kind of hard to then later go to the... So right away, this was kind of part of it. And of course, if you play in third position, your hand frame probably already is a little bit more like this and not so stuck on the violin. And the other thing was that he in general did not want me to be like stuck at the base of the neck. Yeah. So you actually attached a piece of cork here so that I couldn't reach it. That's just to make sure that there was some independence of that. To everything you do, there are disadvantages. So you are less anchored. And when people are not used to it, it can feel like, that sort of...
No man's land. Also.
Yeah, no man's land.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel to me that way because I've always played this way. The other thing is that it puts quite a lot of force onto your thumb because you're not really like holding with both of them, but it's just like the violin is resting on this. And so the key is, in order not to have pain in your thumb, you really need to hold with your neck and not hold too much. But that's something when I was growing up, I was holding it a lot. And then eventually I found it was not good here. I felt it sort of in here. And I hold more with my neck now, and so it's more relaxed. There are different ways of doing it that can be very relaxed. But the one where you're attached here with the first finger, that works great with people who have long fourth fingers. And some people I see just is no problem for them to just play like that. And then, no problem. But if it is a bit, for me, there would be quite a bit of rotation required all the time, and you kind of don't want that. So I have really sort of thought about it later growing up, but it is basically what I started out with. I just became aware of like what parts of it are working, what parts of it are not. And sometimes I kind of revert with pieces that I've played for a long time. I revert too much to a technique where my thumb is too far back and a little tense, and then I find I have more hand tension. Whereas with stuff I learned more recently, I have less tension. So this quest for less tension is always, it is something I think about. I get you kind of have to, because some things you do that worked growing up or that worked when you were young, they no longer work. And our bodies eventually start complaining about some of the weird stuff. And sometimes you see young people who are like playing like, it looks insane. And it works, but then they're not going to be able to do that when they're 40. At some point, you sort of have to go for some efficiency of know how to relax or how to, and still be able to to do it, and it's kind of know what the basic motions actually are that you have to do.
Yeah, and you mentioned, people with long pinky maybe don't have to think about these things, but I think that people get stuck and then, playing tenths from the bottom, this problem.
Yeah, you can have different reference points, and so if something doesn't work, you need to try the other reference point. So instead of thinking from here and now you go up, you can think that's true, or you think from the center, expanding or something. I think that the second position is sort of the key to a lot of things, because I often keep you need a reasonably big hand for this, but I often keep my thumb in a second position. Not all the time, but sometimes if I have to go back and forth a lot, then the thumb stays in second and doesn't always have to move with you. You don't always need to move everything together. You can sometimes leave the thumb somewhere in the middle and go up and down, and then it gives you a reference point. So it's kind of easier. It's easier to play in tune in a way because you're not shifting your whole hand sliding around. Yeah.
So that reminds me a little bit of like Ruggiero Ricci's technique, although it's more extreme.
He had this.
Yeah, and then he was thinking about, okay, well, how did Paganini maybe play? It was like thumb in third position permanently.
Yes.
And which is, and so for some people that they can't handle intonation from that perspective, but like the way you describe it, it has these clear advantages.
I think, well, you can take everything to an extreme, and what works for one person doesn't work for another. So Paganini is the extreme because he was so flexible that he maybe barely needed to shift at all. He could always just stretch down and up, like, sort of elastic.
But I suspect he
rubber.
maybe played like you with this index finger not on. That's my suspicion.
Maybe, because in drawings sometimes you see this.
Yeah.
And if the elbow is out, then of course your index finger does not touch. Sometimes I tell myself when the moments are when it's actually advantageous for the hand to sort of collapse and everything to touch. Sometimes that can suddenly relax your hand. And so I have certain fingerings and positions. Sometimes I play sixes with 1-3. I do that all the time.
Oh, that's nice.
Because it's kind of like, so then I am touching and it sort of provides a moment of relaxation after all the other stuff. So actually I do it sometimes. It actually provides relief because this is harder.
Yeah.
Like it sort of puts tension on your hand. So so I sort of, I'm going the opposite way from you, that sometimes I'm like, oh, I should actually here sort of collapse my hand a bit just to give it a break. But
that makes perfect sense because we often think about like what's the right ergonomic position. Also with sitting, what's the best way to sit? And what I've always learned is like there's no best way. You can be extreme as long as you're aware and you kind of are in flux, and you can do the opposite so that you're not in a static position forever.
It's really bad for your body to hold the same position constantly. Yeah, you find positions that work. So for me, I'm often I have trouble finding a comfortable position sitting to play while sitting. But I know a lot of people who've spent a lot of time sitting who then have trouble finding the right posture standing. But I think this the idea that you're in motion is what prevents you from getting injuries. That if you're somewhat free to like move things around when you need to, then you're not gonna get neck and back problems, and this does apply to here also. I think it doesn't necessarily work for everyone because I meet sometimes people who when they have very small hands then they can't stretch certain things. So some of the stretching part doesn't work for everyone. And this thing, I think it does have advantages for many people, except those with really long fingers. I mean, I'm thinking of James Ehnes, for example. He has very long fingers, long pinky, and so he kind of is like this in the violin.
He's ready to use his thumb on the G string as well.
Yeah, he could totally do that.
Guitar style.
Thumb position. Yeah. And so, and that's just fine for him. And so, of course, if your fingers are that long, it would probably be a mistake for him to play like this, to play with my setup. That might cause all sorts of problems. So you found the position that works for him. So you do have to kind of think about your own hand and your own arms and your own lengths of the proportions, and that's the keys of finding what works for you.
And speaking of hands, I wanted to ask you about how you view the coordination between your hands in the practice room and maybe also in concert. You know, some people are very much like thinking of playing with the right hand and the left hand is this like, light thing that's ready. Or some people are like really focused on this and then this is automatic. Where does your brain go and does it change in the practice room versus on stage?
Yes. It's funny, I'm not so aware of the changes, but it actually changes depending on the passage, whether the left hand leads or the right hand leads. I think that when I was growing up, everything was focused on my left hand, and I didn't have very good right hand technique because I was constantly thinking about the left hand and practicing intonation and all this stuff. So my brain is very focused on the left hand. But what I've been doing for the past 20 years or something, since I sort of rethought my right hand technique, is that I've mostly thought about the right hand. And so there are many passages where the right hand is in charge. I think when you have something with fast passage work and spiccato and stuff like that, oftentimes the right hand has a certain motion and rhythm, and the left hand should follow that. I think probably there are more passages like this. But there are also moments where if the right hand waits for the left hand to do something, it's something that's not perceptible to the listener. They don't realize that there was a tenth of a second delay of something, but it made it clean, the passage, instead of messy. I think as a default, it's more the left hand following the right hand. I think that's probably the default setting, I would say, and more often what results in sort of good pacing, good nice sound and clean playing. But there are just certain times when you have a physical limitation, like you have to jump such a huge distance. You know, you just gotta like wait for your finger to get there or something like that. Yeah. And
does that change? Like, let's say you're in a high stress situation. I know this doesn't happen to you, but like if you are dealing with nerves, and then do you default to some other strategy of like, okay, let me take care of left hand a bit more or right hand? Like, does that change?
I think that if I feel under pressure and I'm in trouble, then I start following the left hand. But it's not necessarily what I want to do. Yeah. It's just that is what that's when I can play cleaner. Yeah. And so if I'm really just like, in a concert, okay, maybe that happens. It's not really what I want to do. I think it ends up sounding better. It's more what I want when it's the other way around, or when I'm. You have also part of the reason why your left hand should follow the right hand is because it's much easier to consciously control the right hand. You can tell your right hand what to do and when to play, and so you have control of your timing, of your rhythm. You have you're in charge. Whereas the left hand, it's many things happen more instinctually. So if you're following your left hand, you might find it is impossible to stop yourself from rushing. For example, if your left hand wants to go faster, you have to go faster with it. If for some reason, something isn't going well with the coordination, then that can sometimes be a solution to follow the left hand. But I do usually try to be in charge with the right hand. And I think the better my right hand technique got, the better my control over rhythm and tempo has also gotten. It was just something that I think the teachers that I had growing up did not teach right hand very well, although they were wonderful teachers in other ways, musically, in terms of sounds, and left hand too, like many things. But I heard conflicting things about the right hand, and these pieces of the puzzle did not fit together and didn't work. You sort of have to then take what you have and figure out what parts are not working and how do you kind of modify that. And I found a way to kind of use the gravity and the weight of the bow more efficiently to have better control, and I think also figured out more about how projection of the sound works. Mostly by watching violinists who could, like I was surrounded suddenly, after I moved to New York, I was surrounded by violinists who could play so loud. And I was like, how is this possible? Like, I don't see them, because when I was growing up, I saw a lot of, it's kind of more the Russian school where people played loud, but you saw the force that went into it. and you're like, okay, well, all this muscle is going into, and I was seeing people who played so loud with seemed like zero effort, and so I wanted to understand that, like, how they're using the weight of the bow somehow, but more efficiently than me, and so I was spent a lot of time thinking about that. As I changed my right hand technique, it was something I sort of had to think about every single day and practice every day. It was my focus for a long time, and then eventually started to become more second nature. And it was a nice feeling when I realized at some point I'm actually quite comfortable now with my bow arm. But in concert, always less comfortable, and it made me feel much better when I realized that's the same for just about everyone I know, that actually even when they seem so calm and in control and they have a wonderful right hand technique, they work on it every day. Yeah. It's not something you just have and never think about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hey, thank you so much, Augustin, for
nice
chatting.
Chat.
I think this will be very helpful for violinists, so I really appreciate it.
So each time that you land, you have a different kind of inflection of feeling. The first time, it's like, which I think is kind of more resigned, and then now you're in the same place again.